Hey everybody, Sal's trying to get hopped back in with his other computer now, so he should be here shortly, but thank you all for joining. Sal's going to do most of the talking. I'm just here to fill in the dead air for him. But I'm sure he had a very interesting trip in Dallas. I hope that I haven't heard anything really about it, so I'll let Sal tell it now that he's here.
Yes, greetings everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. The reason, hang on, let me just adjust my volume here. As always, I'm totally unprepared for my own show. I always try to do too much, and Dr. Sanford said, Sal, you need to stop trying to do too much. So, there're just not enough hours in the day. So I can't even get my green screen to work today. So it's just as well. And let me see what's on the docket here to talk about. Greetings all to the subscribers who've come here for about half the subscriber base right now was visiting on behalf of McLean. Emery tells me there was an indirect reference to people like me, even in like the big evangelical publication.
Yes. That came out as of, I think, either yesterday night or this morning.
So it's like living a double life. I'm just a troublemaker at McLean Bible Church, being threatened with arrest and jail. But really a lot of, that's really such a minor part, but that's what gets the headlines. Minor part of my everyday life. A lot of my professional and personal focus over the last 20 years has been evidence and reasons for the Christian faith, and hence that's the name of this channel. Let me see what I had actually on the docket for today for my own show, because I usually have to list what. Oh, thank you. And Saint Beloved, I want to thank you for your support of this channel. I'd like to also thank everyone who's visited, and then especially those who've contributed financially. That made possible actually a chance for me to take a week off of work and then to drive down to Dallas, participate in the conferences. So a hearty thank you for all that you've done. And I hope what I accomplish on this channel is kind of my expression of gratitude for your support. That tells me the donations, and by the way, there's a link at PayPal, shameless self-promotion, in the video description. That tells me people value what the material that's coming out of here. They value it for themselves and also the people I may reach out to. And that really motivates me to try to do a good job. Now, my videos are not quite as tight as some of the ones that are really well done and edited and conceived of and pre-scripted. Part of that is it's actually really hard to make short videos that can go viral. So
Sal, your problem is you just don't do short on anything.
No. Oh, short is really hard.
Yeah.
Short is like that 10-minute video on the Discovery Institute channel.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There were 5 PhDs working 3 months with an animator because it's exactly the same problem. How do we filter this down to where people are and make it easy? So when I make short videos, that usually takes a day. And the shorter, the longer. The shorter the video, the longer it takes. So my shortest video was a cartoon that I did with a team of 4 people, animators and voice actors and actresses. That took 2 months, between 2 or 3 months between like conception and filming and editing and everything. I mean, it was brutally hard. So I totally agree. That's the problem. It won't go viral if it's not short, but it really does take a large investment. So I kind of will just do kind of a Smokey Saint imitation and just have long streams and just see what comes to mind, because there is a lot of data to filter through. And so now let me just look at the docket here. Now, tell me about your class schedule while I have you. I mean, how's your first day at school so far?
Well, so far, it's only 4 credits this semester, and my thesis that I'm working on is is 2 of those credits, and there's very little. Well, there's some, but there's not a lot of actual writing. It's more data analysis and data collection. So, which means it's a little bit easier, I think, because last semester I had to write my materials and methods, my background for the paper, and do a monstrous annotated bibliography, which is the first time I've ever done an annotated bib in my life, and I do not recommend it. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Don't do annotated bibs if you can avoid them. Just don't do them. But this semester is going to be a little bit easier. It's only 4 credits instead of 6. I do have a term paper to write, but it's not going to be that bad. So I should have a little bit more time than I did toward the end of last semester, where I was just basically eating, living, and breathing and sleeping graduate school. So,
well, the reason I asked is I don't know how busy this channel will be the next few months, but I want to be respectful of your time. You're certainly high on the list of, co-hosts. So let's, with kind of that out of the way, first off, the introduction video, the music with a picture of my dad. This is his birthday, the 25th, 1924. And so he'd be what? Yeah.
98. He'd be 98.
98.
22 now.
Yeah, he died in April 17th, 2000, April 27th, I'm sorry, 2003. I still remember the day. He went home to be with the Lord. And so that was a little of me honoring my father. Now, it may seem strange now that Mom's gone that I talk a lot about Dad, but when Mom was alive, she was just my whole life, really. I was caring for her 24/7, so I did talk about her a lot because that was, she was around. But now that I've had a chance to reflect on both my parents, I began reading my dad's diary in a little bit more detail, particularly the one page in his diary that talked about his battlefield experience. And like a lot of soldiers, he just didn't talk about it. It was just too horrible and traumatic. Ironically, he loved watching war movies. And I'm like, oh, I think I kind of understand why, because it's always a happy ending and you never see all the bad stuff. And maybe that was sort of how he was able to deal with it, whereas my mother could not watch any movie that dealt with war. It was just too horrible. Yeah. So, but Dad, as far as his personal experiences on the battlefield, he would, it wouldn't be that he avoided the topic. He just never brought it up. If I asked him, he would talk about it.
I would suspect that for your dad, the war movies were how he wanted to remember what happened.
Yes, exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. And, Daddy's reluctance to bring up the subject. I mean, growing up, I don't think I can't remember a time he just brought it up on the dinner table. Like, oh yeah, I remember when I fought this battle, or never. He would talk about just the more mundane things about life, his day at the office or whatever. So it would have to be someone bringing it up, or that he'll mention. The only time he might mention it is he said, "Hey Sal, I was at this, I was called to write an article for, we have all these memorial associations of veterans or World War II. And this was much longer ago because most of them have passed away by now.
Right.
That he would ever bring it up. And that seems to be a case for a lot of people that have served in wars in the battlefield. It's just something they'd rather not put on the table. If asked about it, they'll talk about it. So I wanted, to honor him, because now that I read some of the passages in his diary, I admire him even more. I mean, he was just a teenager. fighting in a big war, had a lot of responsibility. And I really, I miss him. I miss him. So that was the opening of the show. The thumbnail was the Institute, a painting of the Institute of Creation Research. One reason I drove to Dallas instead of flying is the airlines are kind of funny right now, if you know what I mean, because of coronavirus and everything. I could be hung up in a lockdown, or someone could have really obnoxious cologne, and I don't know that this would be a fact, and it will trigger me just having a terrible allergic reaction. I will not stop sneezing or whatever, and they might just say you can't be on board. There are all sorts of things that'll trigger an allergic reaction, and I'll look really sick when I'm not. Mm-hmm. I mean, not infected with anything. And I also had a relative, my brother-in-law. I'm very concerned for his health. It seems like every month that he's alive, we have to thank God. He's recovering from lung cancer, but has final stage COPD. And he lives right on the way to Memphis. Right on the way to Dallas. He lives in Memphis, Tennessee. And when you Google the trip from DC to Dallas, it goes right through Memphis. So I said I'll visit him, and I did. And I just felt led that when I'm on that long drive, I'm going to start listening to the scriptures and meditating, and I did a lot of that. So it was a good spiritual thing. So there was good and bad news that I got through the emails in the process of when I was in Dallas. I don't know why I'm out of focus here. Oh, okay, thank you, autofocus. First off, I got an email from Dr. James Carter that Kevin Anderson passed away. Kevin Anderson, yeah, I don't know all the details, so guys, that's all I got. Kevin Anderson was co-author with Mark Armitage on that infamous article that led to Armitage getting fired. So it's, Armitage got all the press because he was the lead author, and he's the one that won a settlement in the six figures from the university that fired him. But Kevin Anderson was very instrumental in that paper, and a great supporter. And I believe Kevin Anderson, I still have an interview that I've never published that I had with Kevin Anderson. I just never got around to it. And did you know that he passed away, Emery?
I did, yes. I was aware of that.
Yeah, okay. Then, so I had just a wonderful time at the ICR. I did not know that the president of the ICR was going to invite me to lunch. He had heard that I was coming. He invited me to lunch immediately. So he rolled out the red carpet. Nice. I was extremely honored. I did not realize the ICR has a staff of like 50. They are a big organization, quietly. So I'm just like, you guys are so quiet. The ICR is not in the headlines. So they're quietly just doing their job. And I'll talk more about the ICR. But I was on cloud 9 when I got home, when I got to my room on Friday, after spending the day at the ICR, and then also with a professor who will not be named. You can understand why. Yeah. And then I got news that Change Tan is no longer with the secular university. She may have been fired. I don't know all the details. She's a tenured professor for 11 years. So
that book.
Yeah.
They will tolerate no dissent.
Yeah. So we don't know where all this is headed. So she's been on this channel. She's a friend and colleague of mine. It mentions me in the acknowledgement section of her book, and I was just like so honored that she would approached me to be a reviewer and contributor in terms of a review, not material. And Ivy League trained, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard postdoc, recruited by Nobel Prize winner George Smith to teach molecular and cell biology at a secular university. She came from communist China. And to come, she was not a believer. She came to the United States, became a Christian, and was appreciating the freedoms of the United
I can't imagine
States.
why.
So, oh well, you know, there's a joke. In the United States, you can, I mean, maybe 20 years ago, this is true. In the United States, you can criticize the government, but you can't criticize Darwin.
Yeah.
And in China, it's like you can't criticize the government, but you can criticize Darwin.
Yes.
So
yes, I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with that along with its origin.
yeah. Well, remember, Darwin is a European, and so kind of on that level, you know, they're not quite, you know, in China, they're not quite so eager to canonize him as some sort of saint. So there's a little dynamic there. But so Dr. Tan, you know, our sympathies are there. Jesus said, if you're persecuted, you have a great crown awaiting for you. And so, you know, you just read the New Testament, Jesus is working all these miracles and then he's crucified, and just like, yeah, isn't that the Christian life? You look at the New Testament, all these wonderful things are happening, and then tragedies are right around the corner because we live in a fallen world. And so I don't know if you knew that about Dr. Tan.
I was familiar with her background from listening to you before, but I did not know she had been removed from her position.
Yeah, it may have happened even as long as a month ago. And I did get an email communicating she had a new email address. I did not. Now it makes sense why she had a new email address. She'd been dismissed from the university, a tenured professor. And she did tell me that she was under a lot of, the university was trying to make her life miserable. So this is a real tragedy, Change 10. I mean, some people think that there is not persecution in academia. I'm just like, there is. And it's not necessarily creationism per se anymore. You can hide as a creationist, like when I was going through school. But now if you don't use the right, the politically correct pronouns, you're a marked person. They know who you are. And so it's a really different environment. I'm not as worried about creationism per se, not because they won't persecute you for creationism, but they found other things to persecute you, to persecute Christians with, and it's much easier to identify now.
Yes. Yeah. The woke virus is it's an extension of the Darwin virus, but it's a worse extension because it's a broader application. And by the way, all you old Earth creationists who, you know, have been hating on us for years, you're next. You're included in this one, folks. You're coming too. So, you know, this one you're not going to be able to get away from.
So greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining the channel. So I'm going to reflect on the important meetings I had with people and spent time with. Obviously, there are around 20 people on this list, and we're going to have to just blast through it. And I wanted to reflect on how ID and creationism are so different from 40 years ago when I became a creationist. And so let me just show this diagram. This is my personal...
a little bit. Can you blow that up a little bit? It's a little small.
Yeah. So let me explain this. I'm not saying this is how true creation is or ID. It's just my personal sentiments from a scientific standpoint. And before I get there, just let me qualify a little bit more. Yes, if someone, like in my personal life, he was miraculously cured of cancer in the name of Jesus. So for a lot of people, that's evidence of Jesus being real. I'm not saying that, I mean, in the most strict theological sense that this should count, but it's, if someone's been miraculously healed, and I've known some people like this, and I ask them, why are you a believer? They'll point to something like that Jesus did something in their life. And if it's not like a miracle of healing or finances or whatever, it could be that just God turned their heart around and made them start living a better life. And that they finally found meaning. And therefore, because God is working in their life, they accept the Bible as true, and they will be led to believe, like, say, the literal interpretation of Christ's genealogy, and an interpretation then that the universe and life are young. And I consider that, each person, that's fine. Now, for me, I had some of that, definitely. And people know that, oh yes, I'm going to talk about, I'd like to thank Matt's. I actually, I got to meet him. And so there are actually two people that have seen me on the internet. We met in person. And I could say more things about Matt's being so generous and his support of me personally, and I just don't want to embarrass him, but just suffice to say, Matt, you're very special in my heart, and thank you. And it meant a lot to me to be in a faraway town and to see someone I'd seen on the internet. So I was saying, God has done things in my life, and I've had my doubts about the Bible and stuff, and so people ask me, are you a young earth creationist? I'll say yes, but I can't defend all the points as comfortably as other points. And that's what this graph is. So I still identify as young earth creationist, but I could say that there are some things I don't feel comfortable defending from an evidential standpoint, meaning the measurements and data we have in hand. I can only appeal at a personal level that I believe Jesus is real. He rose from the dead. He testifies of the scriptures being true. And I read that he interprets the Genesis account literally as I do. And for that reason, I can accept young earth creationism, added to the fact components of the creationist model, I think I can defend scientifically. So now, with that said, let me show this graph. So pre-1970s, I would say that, if I look at the sentiment then, that I would have said abiogenesis is natural. I would have said I didn't even know about the idea of complexity or universal common ancestry or the problem of shared errors, which is an evidence for common descent that evolutionists put forward. I would not have had any idea about life being young, or the human life being recent, or the fossil record being young. Like I watched the movie 1 Million Years BC with Raquel Welch, and that's what I thought, that there were cavemen fighting the dinosaurs, and I thought that was really cool as a kid. Okay, that's the imagery I got. And that was the movie 1 Million Years BC starring Raquel Welch. Some people said that was her best movie too. And I thought the Earth and solar system had evolved and were billions of years, and same for the cosmos being young. I have to correct the slide. It's not the cosmos system. It's the cosmos young. And then in the 1970s, that was pretty much my view. But I maybe just a little bit of change in color there, just because I put the wrong color, so I need to correct that graph. So gray means that I didn't even know that there was a discussion about, I didn't even know the existence of any sort of discussion about these. But by 1980, I was a new Christian, recent Christian, and I got a tract from the ICR that talked about the difficulty of the first life. At that point, I would say I was a Christian evolutionist for 1 year, and then in 1980, I said life is just too complex. I was a creationist. It's somewhere around there. 1990, I was introduced to Michael Behe. He came out to my campus, and he talked about the complexity. And he had an interesting position in that he believed in universal common ancestry, but then believed in intelligent design. Now, he doesn't use the word miracles. He'll say intelligent design. But you can use the same complexity argument to argue for miracles. And that'd probably be the position that Stephen Meyer has, that God had worked miracles throughout geological time to effect changes. So that'd be called progressive creationism. Now, each of those models from a historic standpoint are not very well developed. They don't intend to. They just want to say this looks like intelligent design. And I'm fine with that. Whereas the creationists, especially the young earth creationists, want to affix chronology to the sequence and timing of events. And Emery, you can stop me here anytime. By 2000, I began, that's when I had my crisis of faith, and I nearly left the faith. And you could see then I flipped back a little bit because I began to explore these questions kind of more methodically. So there's the doubting Thomas in me again. I wasn't rejecting it, but I was reevaluating everything. So the year 2000, you could see I'm just kind of, you could see how that graph does indicate for me personally how I nearly, abandoned the faith. I probably would have been an agnostic. I think it's too big of a stretch to ever be an atheist. But definitely by 2010, though, I began to be more confident abiogenesis was a miracle, and that Michael Denton and Michael Behe made the case that even if we accept universal common ancestry, complexity had to be a miracle. And then I also began to think this thing of shared errors is actually compelling. To me, it's a compelling argument in favor of common descent. Because they'll say, we're all similar because God made us that way. It's just reuse of function. I'm like, okay, I could buy that. What about shared errors? Did God make the errors as well? And ironically, it was especially Dr. Sanford that said, if there's one thing that would have kept him from being a creationist, because he was a theistic evolutionist. He became a Christian at age 39, and he was a theistic evolutionist for a few years thereafter. He said, it's the Alu elements. These have been widely considered to be repeat copy errors of large order, because they're about 10-11% of the human genome. And he said, Sal, I want you to investigate these. And I was just like, oh, darn, you're going to give me the thing that's hardest. and he said, yeah, it's still the thing that hangs me up. He said, I just accept it by faith that we're created at this point. And it's not all blind faith, because, there are evidences that he said would be in favor of the young human ages, not the least of which is his genetic entropy. And then there are other things. But he said, Sal, that the shared error, he was open about that. And then in 2016 or so, yeah, he had me work on the Alu elements, and I was just, my jaw dropped. I said, Dr. Sanford, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to come up with anything, but look at all these papers that just came out. That the Alu elements are they express RNAs that are templates that can be edited with adenosine to inosine. They're basically like random access memory. And this was actually highlighted in a paper that this really sets us apart from other primates. The level of A to I editing, adenosine to inosine editing. And I'm like, duh, if you look at a computer, all the chips are identical. You say, well, that's junk because they're just all copies of each other. And I'm like, not quite, guys. Each of these ALU elements there are many of them that are identical copies, but many are not. And we're knowing a lot. I'm starting to know a lot more about hierarchical organization. Just like you have a master key that can open all sorts of locks, there's a hierarchy there. And then you have keys that can only open specific locks. The ALU elements are organized that way. Now, there are some ALU elements that are bad copies. They will cause terrible diseases, or at least, very, not good things will happen to offspring that get bad ALU repeats. But I'm glad you laughed when I said about the, look at all the chips that are identical. They must be junk. And I just realized, oh my goodness. I mean, the reason that came up was that's exactly what these RNA transcripts, that's one of the uses. But as we had in the show 2 weeks ago or so, DNA has optical properties. It can be used as a lens. In mice, they're used as a lens for night vision. They're just all sorts of polyfunctional things that we're only beginning to discover. So there could be structural things that the ALU elements provide while it's DNA. When it's transcribed, it could be sources of A to I editing. And one reason we know it's really important is if you kill the enzymes that enable A to I editing, the creature's dead. So RNA editing is really important, and we have a lot of it, and they come from the ALU elements. So you'll see when you read the Contested Bones, there are 3 pages there that talk about that. Dr. Sanford apologized to me. He said, I should have had some acknowledgments and put your name there, Sal. But that was my work in finding that.
Yeah, I have not had the opportunity to read Contested Bones yet. I stay away from human evolution quite a bit, but I've heard a lot of good things.
Yeah, you and I both. So, and then we had that talk about the Sternberg Paradox recently. The Sternberg Paradox.
Yes.
Collins. And that was another one that was, Swami Das said, that's no problem for evolution. He'll always say that, no matter how good your arguments. And that's another example of like, okay, this is not a shared error. This looks too well designed. So with that, at this stage, I mark it as yellow. I mark it as yellow because I have seen some pseudogenes that are like shared errors among primates. But even then, there could be problems with that. And finally, I'm not beyond thinking that some errors were created by God when Adam fell, and that they may be universal across all species. And he said, Matt's asked, have you ever spoken on your view of HERV similarities as clear evidence of phylogenetic relationships? I have. And so in 2018, after the ALU elements, that was the next thing. I'm like, darn, Dr. Sanford, what do you ask? I want to work on proteins. I'm sick of genetics. But again, it was provident that it was just happened to be that year more papers came out. So I've talked about it, but I haven't studied it very much. Most of my stuff is with proteins, but we are finding lots of important functions. Particularly, they are targets of zinc finger proteins. Zinc finger proteins are things I study. And some of these regions are for CTCF binding sites, and I had a video that showed that. This is really complex stuff. Basically, the genome is like it's called the 4D nucleome. It's a 3D machine that has the DNA acting like robotic arms. that relocate molecular machines to do gene regulation. And so the reason all the cell types, one of the major reasons all the cell types in the body are different, like a bone cell is not like a blood cell or a brain cell, neurons, or skin cells. How can they be so different? Well, that's gene regulation, mostly shutting off genes, mostly shutting off the genes. So, and part of that is done by these robotic arms doing computation for how much to express and when and how to locate it. And I saw some of the neurocells that had alternative splices in them, and evidence of A to I editing because the protein had different amino acids. And it's like, oh my goodness, every nerve cell is unique. That means the cells are able to do kind of a distributed computation, much like Bitcoin or the World Wide Web. And it's going down into the nucleus. So there's signaling between the cells that goes through the cytoplasm into the nucleus, into the chromatin. And all this computation is going on. And so how does that relate to the HERVs? The HERVs may serve as part of that computational complex. So I'm not, I wanted to say evolutionary biologists who've hung their hat on these being functionalist junk. I think 10 years from now, it's going to be embarrassing. I mean, Grauer keeps backing down. He was saying it can't be that much functional. It was 10%. Now it's 25%. I'm just like, well, at the rate you're going, you're going to say, I'm going to retract pretty much everything I said.
I'm still waiting for a retraction on that paper, which was the Gospel of Encode. I'm still waiting for a retraction on that paper.
I mean, these guys are, they're saying evolutionary biology takes precedence over what we're discovering in the lab, and I just highlighted some things. I could go on a diatribe on that. I'm not going to get to my material if I keep going. So then I began to, and then of course Dr. Sanford had influence, about the shared errors, and then he introduced me to the idea of genetic entropy, for which I'm eternally grateful. And so that made me think human life is young, and he and others, Nathaniel Jeanson and Rob Carter, contributed to the idea of the mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam. And I've been ambivalent on that. We've talked about the difficulty of calibrating the clocks. And I gave an example where there's a variation of factors of 200. That does bother me a lot. But still, I'm not saying life isn't young. I'm just saying, can I defend it from the evidence we have in hand? Right. So I accept it by faith, but it's different than when I can defend it. Same for, in 2010, that was my feeling of the fossil record. And then the Earth and solar system being created and young, I put that kind of in still kind of the red category, but it's pink. It's not such a done deal, because this is a very difficult field. And then same for the cosmos being young. But then even now today, like the Big Bang is in big trouble.
Yeah.
So I could almost put yellow here, but this is difficult enough. I would just have to say, personally, I obviously believe the universe is young, but I don't think I have as much data in hand as I would like, relative to, say, the miracle of life up here. So you could see here, we have Nobel Prize winners that think the universe is a miracle. That'd be Charles Townes there, and then Richard Smalley, universe is a miracle. So Charles Townes believed in universal common descent, but he thought the universe was intelligently designed. He said it's kind of undeniable. And the universe is a big thing. Whoever made the universe is really powerful. Charles Townes, evangelical Christian. Richard Smalley there, the colored photo, he was an atheist. Then he became a Christian through the witness of James Tour and Hugh Ross. So Richard Smalley then would be classified as an old Earth creationist. But he rejected abiogenesis being natural. It had to be a miracle. So that's why I put that by 2020, this is like the green box. It's like, I would argue abiogenesis all day against it, naturalistic abiogenesis. I would argue fine tuning. We got that argument. You know, when peer-reviewed papers are appealing to multiple universes to solve this problem, it's like, okay, we've won that argument as far as I'm personally concerned. And because it changed Tan's work on eukaryotic evolution, and then just this, just all, you know, William Bialek on biophysics, yeah, complexity, miracles needed for that. Eukaryotic evolution requires miracles. Go ahead. If you had
No, I was just agreeing with you.
And so we have this model again from kind of mostly Michael Behe, and Denton doesn't use the word miracle, but he's kind of there, if you know what I mean. He'll highlight the difficulty. So there's a nuance between evolution of complexity and miracles for common ancestry, meaning there might be steps in the evolutionary ladder that would require a miracle for it to happen. Whereas like a creature that didn't have an eye, evolving an eye, okay, that's just evolution of complexity. So these are really almost two of the same things. Oh, wow. Emery, are you a mod? Can you delete that? Can you
I got
block that? Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. And by the way, I was only the messenger. It was evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg that found it. So really credit to him. Really credit to him. But then in 2020, I'm even more, the fossil record and the global flood. I finally feel I have better and better evidence for that. I'd like to put the solar system and cosmos in the yellow category, but I'm not there. So you can clearly see this is kind of my quote unquote evolution of sentiments, my sentiment from being all old Earth evolution to where I am today. And I feel I could, anything I have in green, I can personally, I feel I could defend in front of a faculty audience. So my criteria for giving green is, could I stand up before university faculty and defend my thesis? I've presented to university Christian faculty, so they're a more friendly audience, but if I were...
That depends on the university. They may be more hostile.
Oh, yeah, Lipscomb, I'm sorry to say, Dr. McClure, if you're listening, thank you for treating me to dinner, but I think you're still kind of rude to us. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry I have to call them out. You don't treat people like that in the university. You can disagree, but you don't mock them to their face when they've traveled hundreds of miles to make a presentation. That is just low, sir. I did appreciate that you had dinner with us, but I got to call you out on your manners, sir. That's just not cool. And no matter how badly you may have it in for someone, there's just a level of civility that's expected at a Christian university. But thank you for talking to me anyway, Dr. McClure. So yeah, I second that, Emery, depends. But I've had to stand up in front of faculty and make presentations. So I think I could be in the green column and feel confident. I would struggle with the areas that I highlighted here. That I would feel uncomfortable. Like if I had a physics faculty and cosmology faculty, I would not feel comfortable making a presentation in front of them. And so that's what I mean by sentiments. IP. Oh, IP is inspiring philosophy. Oh,
Yes, my over, I think it was an hour and 15-minute rant in total, which was an hour and 30 when I recorded it. I'll have to look at yours, Matt's. I have like Sea Science Film Lab sent me a couple of videos of his he wants me to watch. And then I have yours I have to look at. So I'm a little backlogged on videos people have asked me to watch, but I will try to get to it and have a take at it. But I mean, the fact that he's using the National Center for Science Education, or as someone else has said, the National Center for Selling Evolution. I don't know who that was, but may have been Sal. Yeah, no, that was fundamentally dishonest. And the thing is, like, so many people just swallowed that up, hook, line, and sinker. And yeah, it's nuts. It is nuts. So, I people just pay attention to him. I don't understand why. I mean, he's got high production value. I'll give him that much. He does have high production value. Granted, IP has very high production value. But other than that, everything else he says does is wrong. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, so God teach me to pray your word. And I would, your handle there, sir, is something I'm trying to take to heart. And really, before I go on, it says to acknowledge God in all your ways. And I'd like to acknowledge our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who said, pray always, that you may be able to endure these things and stand before the Son of Man. And so, thank you. Thank you for that. And Dr. Pigeon's here. Oh, wow. Yes, sir. Commander Pigeon. And I like tons of IP stuff. I wish I could make videos like him on like the historical evidences of Christianity. So, you know, I guess we have to be a little bit of a buffet style on the internet. There's some dishes that are served up that are great and some that are awful by the same chef. Okay, it's about the, or might I say poison, okay? There might be some that are nutritious, the others are poison. Maybe that's a little bit more to the point. Thank you everyone who's joining here. So that was a brief I'm sorry, Sandy.
I saw that this afternoon, Sandy. I was dying. I thought it was hilarious.
Okay, so
so you say from the pulpit that the Bible whispers about sexual sin, and you don't expect people to leave your church? Like, what? You legitimately don't think that there are going to be people who go, sorry, I'm out? Oh my! But yes, I saw that, Sandy. It was irony. The irony is off the charts. There, it really is. Of course, this is the same guy who regularly chastises his parishioners for being white. So, you know.
Okay, so I'm going to go through the list of people I met. Randy Gazula.
I think it's Gulliuzza.
Gulliuzza. Sorry, I can't. I'm sorry, Dr. Gulliuzza. I keep pronouncing. He has a BS in engineering, a BA in theology, an MD, Masters of Public Health. He served 9 years in the Naval Engineer Corps, registered professional engineer. He's a medical doctor and engineer. He's retired as a lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, where he served in the 28th Bomb Wing, flight surgeon, chief of aerospace medicine, joined the ICR as national representative, appointed in 2020. Let me tell you something. Flight surgeons have to be pilots as all. He's an engineer, medical doctor, a pilot.
He's certainly not a stupid man.
Okay, yeah. In fact, he's one of the. They could not have picked a very more qualified person to put as president of the ICR. I mean, his staff will really respect him, and he's just a wonderful guy. You know, he heard I was coming into town because I wanted to meet with Brian Thomas. I think probably Brian Thomas said, "I'm going to have lunch with Sal," and Randy said, "I'll treat both of you to lunch." So he rolled out the red carpet. The ICR is a much larger organization than I ever thought. They just don't get the headlines. You know, they don't have the Creation Museum or the Ark Encounter, but they are. They have a good size. Let me see if I have a picture of the ICR building.
Yeah, they just opened the Science and Discovery Center or something like that. I'm trying to remember the name of it. That was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Well, maybe before COVID. Come to think of it, it's been a while.
So let me see if I have a picture of the ICR Discovery Center. This can lead to confusion because there's the Discovery Institute, and that's not the same as the ICR Discovery Center. So,
right, yeah.
So let me show a picture of the Discovery Center that I visited. And you all can find this online. I'm just getting it right now. So there you. That's the ICR Discovery Center. That's DNA there in front of the planetarium. So just suffice to say, we talked, and this will be of interest to you. He told me about his trying to clean up the concept of natural selection. And on the drive home, I said, well, you know, I sympathize with it. I want to minimize, because I think the phrase is mislabeled. What Darwin described as natural selection isn't natural, and it's not selection. It's like calling Biden's creation of inflation, you know, this is wealth increasing or something. It's just the wrong label. It's meant, at this point, it is being used to mislead people that it can act like a designer. So there is differential reproductive success, and Edward Blyth did not use the word natural selection to my knowledge. So
no, Blyth did not use the phrase natural selection. Blyth used, oh good heavens, I have the paper somewhere. Let me find the paper from Blyth, because Darwin essentially ripped him off. Somewhere about here, I have that paper. Let me dig up that paper.
Yeah, and there's a good. While you're digging that up, there's good evidence that Darwin plagiarized Blyth, and that wasn't by a creationist. It was by the provost of the University. Lauren Isley, provost of the University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school.
Who, by the way, wrote that for the 150th anniversary of Darwin's book publication. That's when that came out.
And he published it posthumously.
Yeah.
Because he knew this would be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So Darwin plagiarized it and mislabeled it. So there's definitely differential reproductive success. If you're born with a birth defect, and no disrespect to those with birth defects, actually all of us have birth defects, we're realizing that. Sorry to break the bad news. We all have damage to our genome in some degree or other. But the ones with more damage to their, oh yeah, Dr. Dan, hi. Yes, and Dr. Dan and I might have a show on teaching young earth creation responsibly. So Dr. Dan, we're just covering my trip to Dallas and all the people I met. You'll see it in the video description. We're talking about natural selection right now. And Dr. Gulliuzza says he wants to clean that up. And he has his views at adaptation, and I think some of them are correct. But I think a lot of the adaptation was in the initial creation. Like a whale is adapted for the water. you don't take a land creature, throw it there, and it responds. I think it looks like a lot of the equipment was there to begin with. And so they are doing a lot, when I had lunch with him, I said, oh, developmental plasticity. He said, that's only one part of the adaptation. And I think the most important thing is we know that Discovery Institute's intelligent design and ICR is young earth creationism. So let me just, for the sake of the audience, make a distinction between the two. It's a distinction that Stephen Meyer made. I said, I asked this both to Jonathan Wells and Stephen Meyer. Stephen Meyer gave the best answer. He said, well, intelligent design says it's just designed. It's not particular about the chronology. Whereas young earth creationism, it has a particular chronology of events and timing. And right. I'd say that's good enough for my purposes.
Sal, just to briefly raise my hand, I have found the passage in Blyth's work I was looking for. So
please.
Apologies. This is from an article written by Blyth in, let me just get the year for you. This was published by Blyth in 1835. So keep in mind, Darwin doesn't publish till 1859. Okay, plenty of time. And Darwin and Blyth exchanged letters. Darwin knew who Blyth was. It's not like he didn't know who he was. The article is entitled "An Attempt to Classify the quote varieties unquote of animals with observations on the marked seasonal and other changes which naturally take place in various British species and which do not constitute varieties." Published in the Magazine of Natural History in 1835. And yes, the title is 100 miles long, but they did that. The full title of Darwin's Origin of Species is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, because they just did long titles back then. So here's the quote from Blyth, which is relevant to the discussion here. In like manner, among animals which procure their food by means of their agility, strength, or delicacy of sense, the one best organized must also obtain the greatest quantity, and must therefore become physically the strongest, and be thus enabled by routing its opponents to transmit its superior qualities to a greater number of offspring. The same law, therefore, which was intended by Providence to keep up the typical qualities of a species, can easily be converted by man into a means of raising different varieties. But it is equally clear that if man did not keep up these breeds by regulating the sexual intercourse, they would all naturally soon revert to the original type. I mean, that's to him, at least the way he's thinking of this, he's thinking of a preservative force. He's thinking of something that is going to keep the species from falling apart by allowing those organisms that are, as he put it, best organized to produce more offspring. It's kind of almost the tautological definition of natural selection. You know, the organisms that produce more offspring type thing, except this one they get more food and they're better able to survive for some reason. Therefore, they produce more offspring. So anyways, go ahead, Sal.
Oh, thank you. While you're doing that, I was just doing some admin things over here. So if you saw me looking here, I was cleaning up the StreamYard stuff. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that as far as definitions, ID is kind of like Paley, and Stephen Meyer pointed out it actually goes farther back than that to Robert Boyle. Mm-hmm. Using the watchmaker analogy, which we can say even goes back farther to Cicero. So it had pagan or it had some pagan roots. And whereas young earth creationism, most of its quote unquote Genesis, pun intended, was a literal interpretation of the Bible. So we can elaborate, but also just kind of from a historical standpoint, most of the ID proponents, modern ID, the Discovery Institute, are composed of old earth and progressive old earth creationists. The other thing is we have a lot of people that are of other faiths, particularly the Jewish faith. Mm-hmm. So, and then they do entertain some, Dr. Wells was in the Unification Church under Sun Myung Moon or something. So it ended up being a big tent, and definitely because creationism comes a lot from evangelicals, that was uncomfortable. Now, creationism also has other roots with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the young earth creationism of the modern day. So we don't need to get into that, but the distinction, what was important was when I was with Randy Gulliuzza, he said, we're aligning very much now with the Discovery Institute. He's part of the engineering group of the Discovery Institute. He's made presentations. I'll be making a presentation to the engineering group at the Discovery Institute. And what are engineers doing in this? It's because they're analyzing the complexity of biology. They think that biology is better understood by the engineering paradigm because it's designed. And I talked about how my professor of neuroscience, he was a PhD in electrical engineering, he had no biology background. They hired him to do studies on the ear. He had the right skill set. And we're finding like a third, there was an article some time ago that a third of the engineers at MIT work on biology problems because they had the right skill set. It's like, okay, if you have this part and it does this, we expect another part to exist somewhere that will do that. You know, and like if you're analyzing the shape of a whale or a fish, we would an engineer would evaluate it in terms of its efficiency in being able to propel. Same for anything that flies. I mean, these are not trivial problems. And an engineer will tell you, okay, this is why it's shaped that way and why it behaves this way. Of course, this will lead to medical advancements when we're trying to find cures. So I saw another guy that needs to be taken care of.
I got him.
Thank you. So this is a big deal because definitely people like Georgia Purdom at AIG has said some very hostile things about the ID movement. And there have been other creationists like Terry Mortensen and others. And I thought, guys, you're being a little too harsh just because they're old earthers. And so this was definitely, I think this is building an important bridge because there are young earth creationists who are ID proponents, like myself, like John Stanford, like Paul Nelson, Marcus Ross, etc. So, and now I can add Randy Gulliuzza to that because there are things we can help each other with and we don't agree on everything. So this isn't him becoming an old earth creationist. I don't want to say that, but he's saying that we can challenge natural selection and adaptation, and these are things evolutionary biologists themselves are dealing with. So this was a big deal, and it just providentially, I was at the ICR one day, the Discovery Institute event in Denton, near Dallas, the next. So I got to hear the young earth version and then the old earth version, and both were really good. And so if you have any comments while I look what else is on the docket.
No, my comment, and this is public. I don't completely align with Gulliuzza on some of his anti-natural selection stuff. I'm more open to it maybe than I was a few years ago, but I still am somewhat skeptical of his outright denial. I don't think that that's helpful. So Dr. Gulliuzza, by the way, and I've said this before on my channel, so this is not anything new. If you ever watch this and you want to talk about that, invitation is open. You're welcome on my channel anytime to talk about it. Okay, so I don't. The door's open for that. I'm open to maybe even do two shows. One talk about natural selection. One talk about your goodness, I know the name of this model. Your continuous environmental tracking model. We can talk about both of them. Do two shows, whatever. I'm not on board with either of those yet. I think there's some potential in the CET model. I think that there is I think there's something there, but I think it needs some further refinement before I can completely say, hey, let's put this out there and think this is a good model. And I also need to know how well it works with things like the created heterozygosity model, and things of that nature. So, but again, Dr. Gulliuzza, love to have you. If you want to come, be my guest. I'd be more than happy to have you. And apparently Dr. Dan wants you to come out. So
yeah. Oh boy. I want to say, just as a way of advertising. There's been discussion because of what happened to Cindy Lincoln. I want to have a show on teaching young earth creationism, young cosmos creationism responsibly. I think Dapper Dino did a show critiquing Cindy Lincoln's presentation in the science tour, and it broke my heart to say that I thought Dapper Dino was exactly right. What Cindy was saying was not anything I'd want kids to get. I'm sorry to say that. And I called Cindy Lincoln yesterday to apologize and say this is where I am. I think she got some tough love from Dapper Dino, and Dapper Dino has been a super guy coming to her defense and comforting her, listening to her. Emery and I are one of the few creationists that have tried to be critical of some of the things going on in Dinosaur Adventureland.
Yeah,
I've lost money over this, guys. There's a subscriber that used to donate.
I don't have any, but I did lose a couple of subs because I called Hovind a crackpot in my takedown of IP. So,
yeah. So we're Dr. Dan. I've invited Dr. Dan, Erica, and Dapper Dino to participate with Cindy Lincoln and I, and also maybe possibly Bread of Life. If you weren't so busy, Emery, I would have enjoyed you on the panel. We may not all be able to get together for each show, but the topic is teaching young earth creation responsibly. We'll go over arguments that I think we should not be teaching to creationists, both kids and adults. And some people will get on me because I'll say irreducible complexity is a heuristic to find unevolvable systems, but it's not an argument in and of itself. And I actually congratulated Dr. Dan for hammering Michael B. on his show. And Dr. B spent 40 minutes trying to define irreducible complexity, and Dr. Dan would say, is this complex? Is this IC? Is this not? And I'm like, see, that's exactly why you shouldn't use it as an argument. Use it as a heuristic. So those are some of the things that I might cover. That, of course, these are my opinions, but I've been on the debate stage, at least in text, for a long time. And I'm just like, guys, just don't go into stuff that's either wrong or just leads to rabbit trails. And another rabbit trail is speciation. It's like, go down there. So, I mean, okay. So anyway, that's just.
Sorry, Sal. That's a rabbit hole I will probably go down.
All right. See, and this is okay. Thank you. So, and see, that's this is why I wanted to have shows like this. We can have a discussion, because if the creationists are in disagreement about something, that's a warning flag. Yep. It doesn't mean that I'm necessarily right or wrong, but I'm just saying, okay, just
right. To me, I'm not so much interested in like dealing with the whole, and I know I asked Dr. Dan about this, but I'm not so much interested in dealing with the whole what is a species. I'm more interested in dealing with the diversification of species, because that's something we do have to account for.
And by the way, I don't know what CET means.
Continuous environmental tracking. That's Dr. Gulliuzza's model replacement for natural selection.
Okay, sorry, Dr. Gulliuzza. All right, so we just finished talking about the first person on my list. There are 19 more to go, but we'll have to go real fast. John West. He wrote Darwin Day in America, which is a powerful book. I met him only a few minutes, but really mostly just to thank him for his work. And he said, "You've been in the news lately." And I was thinking, oh, was it my paper with Dr. Sanford on, that got published in Springer Nature? That's what I was thinking. He said, I heard about, huh?
I know what it is, and it's not that.
It was about me being threatened with arrest in jail at McLean Bible.
I don't, Dr. West, if you ever find this, thank you for writing that article on Francis Collins, because I read it off on my show. It was a fantastic article.
So that's he's the vice president of Discovery Institute. He is the boss of the Center of Science and Culture. So a lot of people don't realize only about 20% of the Discovery Institute budget is on intelligent design. A large part of their budget is on like the public transportation system in Seattle, Washington. Okay. And so when I attended one big Discovery Institute conference, it was like, oh, we're talking about economics and public transportation systems and the Federal Communications Commission on use of the bandwidth, the radio wave bandwidth. Okay, ID is all the headlines, but it's only 20% of what they do. They just recruit scholars from all sorts of things. So just suffice to say, Dr. West is the head of Center for Science and Culture. So we'll move on. I saw Stephen Meyer. The guy keeps doing great scholarship and on topics I wouldn't have expected. He's now doing the Return of the God Hypothesis. Did an excellent lecture. I think he's sort of forgotten who I am. Way back in 2009 when we were at a book signing, he said, oh, I said, I'm Salvador Cordova. He said, oh, you're Salvador Cordova. So the God Hypothesis. And he did a lot of stuff that talked about the warfare, the conflict perspective between science and faith. He said that was all fallacious. And he dug up some of the original writings of Isaac Newton and stuff. And he helped us to understand. It was actually beautiful. Some of the scholarship, he went into Boyle's work. So this is, for anyone who's a history buff, this was just great seeing that. He addressed the Galileo thing. And but he talked about all the great men of faith. And when I was driving home, I said, to them, this is their godly mission, to study God's creation. Science was a noble profession to serve God and to serve the Christian faith. And this is kind of really hard to say for me to say this, but I get really angry that like in the 80s, Keith Green was saying he had a tract, one of his associates wrote, should you go to college? So his model was, the Christian life is you go out there and blab. That's what it looked like to me. I said, that's not a very good witness for one. You're not making yourself useful if all you can do is just talk. I'm sorry. And it kind of denigrated people that will go off and to study science. And so this was personally meaningful to me because I felt denigrated in the church because I was interested in science. There are some churches that I was talking to a guy about apologetics. He said, yeah, I'm running an apologetics ministry. He said, I like philosophy. I don't like that science stuff. Okay, you can imagine how I reacted.
Yeah. Same way I would have.
Yeah. So it was heartening because it kind of ennobled what I'm doing. And it's really, because really there has been traditions in the Protestant evangelical faith, especially in the South and in uneducated places that treat you with hostility or treat you like a second-class citizen if you're into science. I have a friend who's in Kentucky, and they said he's a chemist. They just treated him like, like he's an evil person because he likes science. All right. And I'm just like, you have places like that still in the United States of America? And sad to say, yes. So anyway, not to go down there because I wanted to focus on Dr. Meyer's work. I got to shake his hand and thank him. Now the big deal. This is the big deal. Brian Thomas. I specifically went to the ICR to see Brian Thomas. And this led to a lot of things. I'm working on a paper on collagen, so I understand collagen architecture. I've had a video that talked about collagen and zinc fingers. Brian Thomas, I had to ask permission. I said, Brian, you have a peer-reviewed paper in expert review. This is a secular publication. It's premier. How come you only have 150 views? I'm not talking about citations, views. This is a big deal. And it was on collagen. I said, has there been an embargo on this because of fear of retraction? He said, no, we sort of mentioned it. And I said, you know, I haven't mentioned it publicly because I'm afraid they might try to retract it. Not to mention you had a PhD dissertation. And he said, okay, it's been enough time. He said, you have my permission. So, breaking news. I will have a show on Brian Thomas's peer-reviewed paper. How did this get to peer review and it's young earth creation friendly? Well, first off, his co-author is a highly respected chemistry spectroscopist. Highly respected. The editor approached him and told him, write about anything you want. And so the topic they chose was collagens in dinosaurs. This will destroy Mary Schweitzer's claims. This will annihilate a lot of complaints by old earthers or old fossilers, okay? You know, the fossil record could be young and hypothetically, the earth is old. That's the model I kind of like to say, argue from scientifically. It's not my personal view, but I say that's at least defensible because all you're trying to do is establish time of death. This will blow away everything. And because I know collagen, it's just provident I've been studying collagens for like the last year and a half for another paper. Let me see if I could bring up a picture of collagen as we're talking. So, Emery, if you have some thoughts, have you heard about that paper? Because we can now talk about it.
Yes. Okay. So, funny story about that. When that paper came out, I found it like a couple of weeks after it came out. So I'm one of those 150 views. By accident, I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for something else. And I saw that the name Brian Thomas was on it. And I'm like, Brian Thomas? Wait a minute. That can't be the same guy.
And it is.
It took me a bit. I had to go back and look into it. Like, wait a minute, Brian Thomas. He's into fossils. He's into soft tissue. This paper's about that probably is who this is.
Yes, and it was an expert review. It was a secular journal. You could tell if you look at the other papers; these are top tier. You know, in their specialty. All right. So now let me show a picture of the collagen sequence. These are the amino acids of collagen. And as I said, there is a telltale non-random pattern there. It's just beautiful. So where was I going with this? Where was I going with this? When you eat Jell-O, you know, I you know, as part of a dessert, when I was a kid, I ate lots of Jell-O. It's actually extracted from cows. You can take it from their bones, and then you have a gelatinization process where you subject it to acids and a number of treatments. But the basic thing is you're able to extract collagen, and it's this protein here. Very recognizable signature, and Dapper Dino would be interested in this. Because DNA may not be available in the creature, but if you have collagen, you can get a sequence with mass spectroscopy. So we may be at the point we can actually sequence some dinosaur proteins, maybe very few, but you can actually, Brian Thomas told me you can identify species just by their signature. And in fact, let me see if I have a diagram here. I have one. Hang on, guys. So let me try to make this a little bigger for everyone to see. You can distinguish like a zebrafish from a human from a zebrafish based on the sequence. I know that's kind of grainy and hard to see, but we can now probably identify unique dinosaur species this way. But that's neither here nor there. The point is we can use the gelatinization process to extract pure proteins. Bacteria do not express collagens like this. So any of this contamination stuff that the old earthers are claiming that's out. We now have a way of filtering it. Rob Carter gave me a data point that was very important. He said we've confirmed chromatin in these cells. These are eukaryotic. So now we have this collagen, and you have the amino acids there. The amino acids have carbon. In Brian Thomas's dissertation, he said we had some difficulty getting enough collagen to be able to apply accelerator mass spectrometry, but we did it for 3 samples, and we're going to try to do it for more. Can you guess where this is going, Emery? And he said there's 5% modern carbon. I said any mass spec ought to be able to detect 5% traces.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason that they say it's not no good is because it's not because the instruments can't detect it. It's because it doesn't agree with the paleontological narrative. But I said, Dr. Thomas, you made my 1,200-mile drive worth it. And I really meant it. This blows it away. I said, so what about soft tissue preservation and what Mary Schweitzer, God bless her, and I really do pray for her. And we were kind of joking. I said, you know, the Lord's trying to just let her know. I said, you know, isn't it amazing she left the young earth creationism, and who would God choose to bring the world of soft tissue dinosaurs to the world but Mary Schweitzer? It's like, Mary, the Lord's talking to you. So all this stuff about leaching, contamination, bacteria, and soft tissue, iron, and oxidation mechanisms, all out the window. This makes it all moot. It's all moot. We have a well-established process for purifying collagens. We can also detect that the signature is dinosaur collagen. I mean, you could have other eukaryotes. You might say, when Rob Carter said, oh, we confirmed it's chromatin, I said, well, there are other eukaryotes like fungi. Can't rule that out. But fungi don't make collagen. And so I was on cloud 9. I said, we got something now. Mm-hmm. We got something you cannot explain. We got C14. And you might complain about the experiment, but Brian Thomas said, Sal, we need fossil diggers, and we need fossil diggers to find more fossils. It's not so much the quantity. We can get lots. He said it's the quality. You need to have a good enough sample, you need to get proper accession, and it needs to be a certain quality that it still has enough collagen that it's not powdery. So what do you think, Emery? Wasn't that a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. I don't necessarily grasp all the chemistry that goes into this because I'm not a chemist, but I can see the potential here. I see that there's quite a bit of potential. There's some interesting stuff there. Again, I'm not a chemist, so I'm not a complete expert. But
well, and Dr. Dan, this is great. He said, I'm going to complain about the experiment. That's on the list of arguments you shouldn't use. All right, so he'll say that's an argument we shouldn't use, and I'll say, in good conscience, how can we deny this? And this is, well, okay, Dr. Dan has given me free advertisement. Since he has a different view than I do, why don't you all come to the show when we get together? How's that sound, Dr. Dan? How's that for free advertisement? All right, so, unlike what will happen in modern day debate where people scream at each other, we'll just say, okay, I'm just going to say, as far as my perspective, I can't in good conscience say that we should ignore this. I mean, I've studied collagen. I know that, this has a lot of potential, and I think he could be right. The one thing, let me show this. And I totally understand this. He said you have, and Dr. Carter, who is a professor of biochemistry and organic chemistry, he'll say that there's a hydrolysis process. The spelling of these letters here, like in this human collagen, it's going to start to break down over time. It's just not going to last. And Dr. Thomas pointed out, he said, well, when we look at this, why do you see that some bones, the collagen's totally gone? And yet sometimes it's preserved, sometimes even in the same fossil. That indicates that it can decay, and some things slow down the decay. That's just from a chemical standpoint. But when you can't deny, when you purify this, you've got collagen. It has a unique sequence. You can identify it as not being bacterial because bacteria don't make collagens. It's not fungal because fungi don't make collagens. And you can identify it to the species. So we're going to actually be at a chance we can sequence, and by way of inference, suggest what the dinosaur DNA might be like. Won't be direct because of the codon degeneracy, but we'd get a good idea. And so when this is extracted, you've got the original carbon, no contaminant. You can't use the contamination argument. And if it has a C14 signature, that means the fossil's young. What I specifically went to Dr. Thomas about was racemization. But when he told me, he said he had these, he sent it off to a lab for C14 testing. And all they do is they just measure how much % modern carbon there is. They may send it back with a date or whatever, but the accelerator mass spectrometry can measure, it can measure 5%, okay? When it gets down to 0.0001, yeah, I can understand that may or may not be questionable. 5%, that certainly seems feasible. And he sent it off, and I said, okay, I think that's the platinum standard for the age. And what we were saying, he said, Sal, I said, Dr. Thomas, this doesn't tell us what the age is. It tells us what it can't be, what the age it can't be. It's not the age that it is, what it isn't. It's telling us it can't be millions of years. The time of death could not be millions of years old. And so I say the C14 is the platinum standard, but next to that are the other chemical dates like racemization. And then James Carter and Jay Weil can talk about like oxidation and other sorts of chemical dates. I said, my goal is to show consistency here. So whether people agree with or not, for me personally, that's good enough. And we can, there's nothing stopping us by saying, okay, why don't we get the other side? We're going to do the experiment up to your protocols the next time. And we're not going to use Chinese fossils that were given funny accessions. So if you have any comments before we move on, because otherwise we're not.
Nope, I'm going to let you move on because that was person number, what, 4 on your list of 19 or something?
Yeah, but he was the biggest. I mean, that was the biggest news for me personally. We'll do a whole show on that. Mm-hmm. William Dembski, he got me started in the ID movement. He tried to get me into Baylor to be his graduate student, and they shut the evolutionary informatics lab down in 2007, and I ended up at Johns Hopkins instead of Baylor.
I think you won that battle, Sal.
Yeah, thanks. And he was a big founder of the ID movement. He was kind of in. There's a video on the foundation of the ID movement. He's one of the founders. I've criticized his idea of specified complexity, but he did get me trained up in the ideas of probability and trying to detect design. And he was just a great mentor and friend. And he proposed this idea of steganography, which I don't have time to get into, but the idea of that the reason for differences in our DNA sequences across species is to help us understand biology. One project I published on is in the SciCalc algorithm, and we can do 3D structural predictions just based on the sequences alone, which seems like voodoo. and he pioneered that idea. He told me it was actually due to David Chu, who happened to be the co-author with Kurt Durston, who I work with. So it all traces back to some people I know. He was sitting beside Walter Bradley, the other person I met. So when I nearly left the faith, I read Walter Bradley's book, The Mystery of Life's Origins. It's critically acclaimed even by atheists like Robert Shapiro. Not the Robert Shapiro of the O.J. Simpson trial, Robert Shapiro, the chemist. Okay. And I broke down in tears when I saw Walter Bradley, because 5 years ago I was told he was dying, and there he was alive, and people said, yeah, God worked miracles. I broke down in tears. I said, thank you, Dr. Bradley. You saved my faith. So the book, Mystery of Life's Origin, and maybe I could show it here. Dr. James Tour, there's a revised version of the book, Mystery of Life's Origin.
You're breaking up a little bit, so.
Oh, that's probably when I access the internet. So, am I still breaking up?
A little bit still, yeah.
Okay, I might have to kill that window then.
So
I'm going to kill that.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah, it's just when I do a page refresh or something. So I'm going to kill the screen share. So that was the book, and James Tour was this time a contributing author. But I only got to speak to Dr. Bradley, but I guess you can kind of understand how I feel when someone had helped rescue your soul and you never met him.
Yep.
And for the old earth creationists out there, I even had the same thank you to Dr. Hugh Ross, who I don't share his views about the age of the universe, but he was there for me too. So that's Walter Bradley. Jonathan Bartlett. He is the founder of the Blyth Institute, and for the sake of full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors. It's a small ID outfit, and I published one paper there on Fisher's fundamental theorem. So I'll just I might be publishing some of my young Earth creation stuff through the Blyth Institute. So I'll just show the Blyth Institute website here. I'm going to do one on relativity. And they are an ID-friendly journal. But one of the differences, like the Creation Biology Society or some of these places, they always say, okay, your paper has to talk about Jesus at some point. And, you know, we do acknowledge Christ in all that we do. But if we're making a secular publication, we frame it like a secular work, like we would calculus. I mean, if I were writing a math book, I might say in the acknowledgement section, say, all glory to God. My physics book has that. But it's not like every chapter has to try to tie this to Christianity. And that's kind of the strength of it. That's another discussion. Blyth Institute doesn't have theology in it. So I want to publish some of my young Earth creation stuff in there. So that's about Johnny B. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. Jake Hebert. How many know about Jake Hebert?
You're breaking up again, Sal. Try again.
Yeah, that's every time I access the internet. So
okay, got it.
It makes sense. How many people have heard of Jake Hebert?
I have.
Okay. ICR is Jake Hebert III. He has a PhD in physics, and he does things on atmospheric research it's related to the dating of the ice cores and all. But it turned out it's actually would overturn some of the claims of the climate change guys. And now we had an interesting conversation because he's a physics guy. And so we just talked about half the time we spent just reminiscing about our adventures in the physics world. We talked about things like Hamiltonians and just, stuff that most people wouldn't even want to touch. And we were talking about statistical mechanics. And I said, oh, look, you have a book there by J.D. Jackson on electromagnetic theory. And the units are not in metric, they're in ergs. And we were just laughing. Okay, so these are like inside jokes among the physics guys.
So in other words, you nerded out about physics for 15 or 20 minutes. Good for you.
Oh, absolutely. and he said, I was afraid I was going to get attacked by the climate guys for criticizing Milankovitch theory. And he explained the Milankovitch theory about, something about atmospheric sensitivity in the ice cores. I didn't quite get it. And he said, I disproved it and I have the data. And he said, you know how they decided to deal with me? They ignored me. And that's when I said, I've been thinking about this a long time. The other side likes to ignore the really good creationist scientists. They would rather have buffoons representing Christianity and creationism. And that's why, like on modern day debate, who do you have? Flat earthers. Like every week, you have a flat earth debate. He's a Christian creationist, flat earther, highlighted. The atheists love it. Yeah. And I said, I think I'm starting to understand the business model now. One reason we have certain creationists rise to prominence in the YouTube sphere is because the other side really wants them to exist and will promote them. And I said, so both our stuff is too technical and the other side doesn't want to deal with it. Doesn't get them the search engine hits. It doesn't generate the drama. I mean, so
that's honestly the biggest contributor is the internet is all about drama, and the stuff that we talk about, generally speaking, you talk about protein biology. You're not really generating a whole lot of drama.
Yes. Yes. Oh, and we have another visitor. Someone could zap him.
I've already got him. I PM'd you in the private chat.
Thank you, Emery. Thank you for your service, sir, for fighting our evil invaders.
I mean, that's 3 tonight. We're on a roll here. I don't know what's going on.
It's been happening lately. So we'll just move on from there. But the takeaway is the good creationists will not be well represented. That's just going to be the way it is. We'll remain in obscurity, and then it'll be people like Nathan Thompson, the flat earthers, Kent Hovind, and many other names I might better not mention that are going to dominate the headlines. And it doesn't reflect well on Christianity, and that's part of the reason that it's highlighted, I'm sorry to say. So the next guy on the list is Brian Miller. And
okay, this is the first name I don't know.
We might have a little bit of, let's see, discovery. All right. Okay, he was on James Tour's channel, MIT PhD in MIT PhD from Duke University. He's with the Discovery Institute. I criticized him on his advocacy of thermodynamics, but I applaud him on the engineering. And so this is the other thing that's been kind of nice. We can disagree with each other to each other's faces without getting angry. So Dr. Gulliuzza, for example, said, I totally disagree with John Sanford. And I didn't take it personally.
Yeah.
And I said, well, our latest publication gave a different take on the definition of fitness. And I think he appreciated that. I said, it took me a while to get, Dr. Sanford had our discussions on this. So I think we're actually, and I truthfully could say this wasn't just trying to whitewash anything or try to be diplomatic. I sincerely said, I think he's probably closer to your views now in terms of describing adaptation in terms of engineering fitness. So I wouldn't say that we're all together on the same page, but so all this to say, I've disagreed personally on some matters with Dr. Miller, and we can agree on others, and that's about defining fitness and adaptation in terms of engineering. So about a year and a half ago, about a year and a half, I had a debate with Dapper Dino on fitness, and his thing was...
Yes, I remember that. That's the only debate I've ever watched.
Wow, and it was the one that you started because he wanted to debate you, and then I volunteered.
Yeah, I started that. So actually, well, okay, you actually started that. To be perfectly fair, Sal, you started that.
Okay.
So I did. Dapper followed me. I don't know exactly why. At some point, he found me on Twitter or something. And so he and I had minor back and forths before, and it had always been pleasant. So I knew that, like, when Dapper showed up, no, he showed up because of because I did a phylogenetics live stream. That's right. So he showed up because of that. That was in 2020 when we were all in lockdown. I had nothing better to do, so I streamed did phylogenetics live for a couple of hours. So Dapper and I had gone back and forth a few times, and it was very friendly. But I did a video on fitness. But the reason I did a video on fitness is because I had watched your presentation on fitness, and I went, you know what? A lot of that makes any sense, but I can't do the math. I can't do the population. You know how good I am at population genetics, Sal. How many hours did we spend on that? So I went, well, I just want to talk about this in a level that's going to be a little bit more accessible and a little bit less math heavy. So Dapper saw that video and wanted to debate me on fitness. And I said, well, so I sent somebody an email, and you know who that somebody is, because I didn't have your email at the time, and I didn't know how to find you. And so you got back to me, and you ended up debating Dapper, and that's how I got introduced to you, which has led to way more hours than I care to count sitting across the YouTube screen.
But the fundamental point in the ID community was not the discussion. I mean, we had like irreducible complexity and the bacteria flagellum. Now the discussion is focused on defining adaptation in terms of engineering principles. And I wanted to say that's a huge step. And Randy, Gulliuzza, ICR, the Old Earth creationists at Discovery Institute, we're all on board on the same page. That this is a big deal. So that innocent, nerdy debate I had with Dapper Dino is going to be big implications now. Because after my paper got published in Springer Nature that I co-authored with Dr. Sanford, Bill Basner, and Ola Hoscher, people are like, this is going to be significant. I'm just like, yeah. Because we're going to show that natural selection is vacuous as the way it's conceived in population genetics. And I'm even going to argue natural selection is not even the right label. If you said origin of species by differential reproductive success, that would be a more accurate way to characterize it. Instead, they make it seem like it's a designer that has purpose and goals. That's why I don't like the word selection, because that is like a moral, that's like a conscious agency that has purpose. And so I don't like the word selection, and it's certainly not natural. Oh, yeah, book chapter. No, that's fine. Thank you for correcting. All right, thank you. So I'll be more careful. Thank you for pointing that out. So So anyway, this is going to be a big argument. And whether or not we reference our chapter, other people have pointed this out, starting with Lewontin. And that's another forgotten real paper. And, you know, those are the sort of things that don't make the cover of Nature that are written by top-tier evolutionary biologists. People just don't want to give it a mind because it reflects negatively on the entire field. And there've been other papers, and one we talked about here, What's Wrong with Evolutionary Biology, written by an evolutionary biologist. And I wanted to say, well, that was only like 1% of what I felt should have been in that paper, but it was the right title. Right. So next is Casey Luskin.
Ah, I know this name.
He disappeared off of the radar because he's getting a PhD. And many of you know my life story was.
So you're breaking up again.
That's the internet. Am I back on?
Not quite. Try now.
Okay, I'm going to share this screen, and I don't know why they have advertisements of a girl with who's really endowed. And this is the Nature publication.
Sal, if you want me to do the share screening so that your internet doesn't fall apart, just PM me the links and I'll share them. Okay?
Okay. I'll do that.
A whole lot easier.
Good idea. So anyway, there was a girl that was really endowed. I don't know.
Don't worry. I run ad block software, so that won't be a problem.
I was just like, okay, most of my ads are like
run that ad.
Yeah, most of my ads are like Thermo Fisher, you know, just really nerdy stuff. How'd that one pop up?
Yeah, you and I get nerdy ads. Like we don't get the nasty ads. We get the ones that are like.
Okay, I did get some ads when because I was in the I'm also in the financial world. And I used to visit the Zero Hedge thing. And suddenly I started getting this ads for the website sugardaddy.com. Because apparently they're trying to appeal to rich financial executives.
People with money, right? Yeah. So
yeah. But it was just funny, and I did look. You can look up sugardaddy.com.
I don't want to. I'll pass on that.
It's
I'll pass
funny.
The funniest ad I ever got was for a coffin manufacturer.
A coffin manufacturer.
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, Casey Luskin was with me in that story, Nature 2005, April 27th, 28th. And that's the first time I saw him in like 15 years. Head of the idea group that got me in the cover of Nature, and then went on to be an attorney at Discovery Institute. Dropped off briefly to get his PhD, I think in geology. He's an old earther, and he gave a talk on the fine-tuning of the planet, which was great. And we're going to hang out now that we have a lot of video conferencing, thanks to Zoom, etc. It's good to have the face-to-face meeting, but now we'll actually fellowship throughout Lord willing, throughout the years electronically, because he's out in Seattle and I'm on the other coast. And this is actually really beautiful also to hear kind of the old earth perspective, where they just talk about fine-tuning and you realize what a great God we have. You could make this entire universe. That's a lot of power. And he did have one funny moment where he got all the interesting questions at the Q&A. And someone said, is the center of the earth like hell? Would that be a good model for hell? And Casey Luskin said, I don't think I want to be an expert on hell. And everyone started applauding. So
that's a pretty good answer, honestly.
That was really sharp. But all this to say, you could definitely feel the thread of Christianity in this Discovery Institute presentation. That it's heartwarming to see it being presented in a church, but it's not theologically heavy. meaning we weren't reading a lot of scriptures. It was mostly science, but you could tell that that Christian thread was there. The most scriptures we got was when Eric Hedden spoke. I didn't have a chance to introduce myself to him. He was the one that Jerry Coyne tried to out from Ball State University.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So I didn't get to meet him. I should mention him in passing. I'd met he was a professor in a secular school on geology. He also worked in the petroleum industry. Big name at ICR. They landed a good one, and he's revising a lot of.
Clarey. Clarey's a good guy.
Yes. He has been in disagreement with other creationists over the geological column, and I think disagreement's healthy. And he has more of a secular perspective, but he's adding a lot. And Jake Hebert said, "Oh, I'll tell Tim Clarey, Sal, that you like the hydroplate model." And I said, "Don't. We don't need any more arguments." So that's all I'll say. Unless you had something else to add.
No, that's all. That's all.
Ray Balen, a forgotten name. Now,
why do I know that name?
He's a Discovery Institute fellow, but this is a very interesting story. He was a young Earth creationist, or young age creationist, a YAC, terrible acronym. He no longer identifies as such, but he's still an ID proponent. I didn't ask him if he's an old Earth creationist, but he's definitely on our side of, like Michael Behe and the rest. To his credit, he has a PhD in molecular cell biology from some university in North Texas or something like that. And he studied population genetics under evolutionary biologists. So this was a big deal. I could tell in his presentation that he really understood. He really must have studied under an evolutionary biologist because he knew their arguments so well. And I thought, I might just yawn through this, but, I gave him the respect, and he actually pointed out some really interesting things. Ono had actually criticized the problem with the Cambrian explosion, that, how many millions of years does it take to change 1% of the genome? How can we have this burst of explosion in all these forms, and presumably new cell types and also new genes? It blows away any sort of molecular clocking. And it also he's writing a new book on the limits of biological change. Ironically, I said we need to get away from trying to discuss biological change at the species level. It's clearer at the molecular level, much clearer at the molecular level, because unfortunately, I don't have a link to share with you here. I'm going to have to bring this up on my PowerPoint. I'm sorry. And we're going to break up a little bit, but I have a diagram I wanted to show. This is, let me do a share screen. Share screen. On the left is collagen. On the right is a zinc finger protein. It should be very clear that one can't evolve from the other, and it'd be questionable that they could have a common ancestor. At the molecular level, it's very clear microevolutionary changes cannot create macroevolutionary changes, so to speak. I'm using the terms loosely here. But at the molecular level, it becomes really clear, in my opinion, that there are limits to biological change. So he was still arguing at the species level. And so that's what I got from that. And I'm going to download I'm going to try to download his presentation. So we got through these guys relatively fast. I'm getting toward the end. Can you believe it? There is an unnamed professor that I met that I had scheduled to meet. I drove out to the professor's home. I don't want to disclose her identity because she's a professor at a secular university, and given what happened to Change Tan, this is really sensitive.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, I got some really important data on protein structural biology and got to get her views about some of my ideas. And I'd love to talk more about this, but I can't because I'm at risk of outing her if I talk about the exact nature of the work, so I can't. Suffice to say, and this is a discussion I've had, I said, it seems they're just, I don't know if this is your perception, but I've been around a little longer. I'm seeing more and more creationists at the top tier at all levels, not just the top tier, but all levels now in the biological sciences. Yeah, we have persecution and politics and whatever, but I'd say there are opportunities. If you are good in your field, the right people you'll be attractive to the right people who just want to get the job done. Like if you want if you're a cancer research laboratory, they want your ability to help them find cures. So what if you're a creationist? If that's the mission of the agency, I'm just pointing that out. And that's where a lot of people are. It's going to be difficult. I'm not trying to whitewash this. I really feel for those trying to matriculate through the system. So that's all I have to say about that. Next, Jeff Tomkins at the Institute of Creation Research.
Another gentleman I've talked to, very, very, very intelligent gentleman.
Why don't you share?
So I can't really share much about my conversation I had with Jeff.
All right, we won't then. We won't. I don't want to. I know why. So strike that. Jeff is the genetics guy. He and I, Dr. Sanford assigned me to work with him for about 6 weeks on the chimp human assembly, and we were having laughs about how badly it's been done and all the shenanigans going on. And there are some mechanical reasons. It's very difficult to get sequencers that can actually read the entire genome. The Illumina sequencer gets fragments of only about 100 bases. Okay, the human genome is like 3.3 billion. And so the assembly process is you dump this into whatever, into the sequencer, and it's going to, or the mechanics of how this, you end up with fragments that are only 100 bases long. And you have to reassemble it, and you guess how they connect like a puzzle. So there are some systemic problems in trying to describe what the human genome, the chimp genome looks like. So my understanding is they use the human genome as a model for how to put all these fragments, these chimp fragments on. So it's like, okay, well, no wonder it looks like a human.
Yeah, and that's kind of assuming what you're trying to prove.
Right. And we're still having some problems with that. And Jeff was talking about the shenanigans. He did tell me something very interesting. And I'm kind of halfway between Nathaniel Jeanson and Dr. Dan here on the mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal atom. The reason I'm non-committal is just like that paper we read 2 weeks ago. I said they recalibrated their numbers by a factor of 200. I'm just like, whoa, guys, this does not make me feel good.
Yeah, that's not comfortable.
All right, on either side, I said if you did physics this way, this would be really bad. I mean, we were able to judge the speed of light plus or minus some meters per second. You don't have changes of factors. I mean, when Maxwell calculated the speed of light, he was off by like 50%. We're not talking like 20,000% off. Yeah. Okay, so I just, at this stage, I'm not comfortable. I study population genetics and even Nathaniel's math. I'm just like, Nathaniel, I just don't feel comfortable. All right, I'm not saying you're wrong, Nathaniel, and then I'm on your side, but if someone with my background is having a hard time working through this, I said that this is just not where I feel comfortable. I want to be able to teach this. So there's a standard one by Parsons that said, okay, we have this mutation rate, mitochondrial. You use somatic cells. Oh, by the way, just as an incident, we were all wondering, how can you get DNA from a blood cell that doesn't have a nucleus? Mitochondrial DNA is not in the nucleus.
Mm-hmm.
Duh. It only registered. I was about to fall asleep one time and I realized, oh, that's why. It's just the strangest time you think of things, because we were all debating how can blood have DNA? Because you'll see it in a lot of texts, they'll say blood doesn't have DNA. It doesn't have nuclear DNA. The mature erythrocyte doesn't have nuclear DNA.
Right, because it expels the nucleus, but it can't expel the mitochondria.
So it's the mtDNA, and there are all sorts of things being able to distinguish a germline change mutation by using somatic cells, and that's kind of difficult. So granting that Howell and Parsons did that, if you use a simple model, and I'm trying to find the equation for this, I think for an expanding population, you can just take the mutation rate and calculate back as Parsons did. And that's, you know, I don't like weighing into this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just pose this to population geneticists. Tell me what model, under what circumstances can we just use the rate Parsons got? But there was an even better stuff that Jeff Tomkins gave me. Let me see if I could do as you suggest and send you, maybe I have Jeff's paper. I'll do it on my other computer. Maybe I'll just, let me see. Don't do this to me.
Hang in there, Sal.
Okay, I'm going to get, oh, there it is. I'm going to forward this to you right now.
All right, am I checking my email or the PM?
Your email, can you do that?
Yeah, I can do that. I just needed to know where to go.
And there's one called the human exome. I think it's the first list.
All right, let me load up my email here real quick.
Okay, it's a letter, and it's the analysis of 6,515 exomes.
Okay, yep, I just got it. Let me pop it open. Oh my goodness, there's a ton of. Okay, which attachment am I supposed to pull out here?
It's the first one.
First one, human exomes. Okay.
It says analysis of 6,515 exomes.
Yes,
and you can share it.
Okay, let me get this to a screen where I can, because right now it's opening up as I need to open it as a PDF here real quick.
Okay. Oh, someone was in Farmers. Okay, I'm just going to fill some time here. Greetings, Keith Colvin. Hello from Farmersville, Texas. How far from Dallas is that, Keith? I was in Dallas. I went through I-30 from Arkansas on my way to and from Dallas. Just FYI. So whenever you're ready, Anne-Marie.
I'm trying to find it. I've got it open, but it's a matter of me figuring out where it's at.
I gotcha.
Oh, because it didn't open in Chrome. Okay, that's why. All right, so we will. I'm just gonna have to share my whole screen here, Sal, and you're gonna have to deal with that. Sorry. So we're gonna share, and then we're gonna flash this up. So there you go. Can you see that?
Yep. And if you want to zoom or anything, you could probably guess the part I want to read. In the abstract.
Oh, just the abstract? Okay. Let's see.
Like in 5 to 10,000 years.
Approximately 86% of single nucleotide variants predicted to be deleterious arose in the past 5 to 10,000 years.
That's it, baby.
It's not perfect, but that's bloody good.
That's pretty good. And you could show the title there.
Yeah. This is analysis of 6515 exomes reveals recent origin of most human protein coding variants. And for the record, folks, this is published in Nature. This is not a podunk journal. This is Nature. So,
all right.
Anyway, you done with that, Sal?
I'm done with that.
All right, I will stop sharing then.
Okay, so I said, so based on this, I don't know how they did this. This is what I get a little upset. It's like, I want to know how to do this, then I can, give the thumbs up or thumbs down to the methodology. This is in Nature. Why is it that all these deleterious mutations appeared 5 to 10,000 years ago? And supposedly they didn't exist prior. There wasn't as many. It's like you had a clean genome 5 to 10,000 years ago. I don't know how they did this. He told me there was some sort of association that they did. They said someone with an exome with this mutation has this disease. And so when they're able to track the exome mutations associated with disease, they said based on the divergence time, they said this birth defect emerged 5 to 10,000 years ago. So we look at all of the disease-associated mutations. They all started to happen around the time of the fall.
Again, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Okay, so in the morning was Brian Thomas on the collagen C14, eliminating the contamination argument, making moot Mary Schweitzer's mechanism of preserving soft tissues. Totally. Okay. I was on Clyde 9 there. Then Jeff Tomkins. Then there's Jake Hebert. I briefly talked to Tim Clarey just, to tell him there's someone I'm mentoring who wants to go study creationist geology. And I said, could he talk to you on the phone? So with Jeff Tomkins and really Brian Thomas first and Jeff Tomkins second, this is really good stuff. Unlike Jeff, I did not know. I knew about the Parsons paper, and that's been debated on the net with Dr. Dan, between Nathaniel and Dr. Dan. And I'm kind of in between for the reasons stated. But then Jeff shows me this. I was just like, okay, this backs up Parsons.
Yeah.
And then you got Brian Thomas. I said, okay, this is getting very promising. And like you said, this wasn't some podunk journal. Good on them. And nothing's stopping civilization except civilization itself from doing more research.
Uh-huh.
That's why I'm encouraged.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I agree.
So thank you for showing that. I don't know if that made that put a big smile on my face, brother.
That was great. And that's a paper I never would have normally opened. Like I don't really get into exomes and all that other stuff.
Yeah, Jeff does. Okay,
yeah.
So Jeff's been criticized for his figures on chimp human ancestry. There's still argument over the.
Nobody was criticizing him when he was leading Clemson's genetics lab. Yeah,
exactly. There was one on the chromosome fusion, but this was from Nature.
Yep.
Okay.
Waiting for Dan Grauer to show up and throw a fit.
Yeah. Okay.
It's hilarious. I used a textbook of his, and my teacher repeatedly said, yeah, Grauer's a little strong here. Yeah, I don't think that's quite right. It was repeated throughout the entire course.
Okay. So we're talking, I'm going to have the show with Erica, Dapper Dinah, Dr. Dan, and we'll talk about teaching responsibly. So they'll probably say some of this stuff is not responsible yet. And I'm like, okay, duly noted, sir. I'll pass that on. So I'm just going to say, okay, the students, I'll say, okay, Dr. Dan signed off on this argument. He won't sign off on this one. It's my responsibility to tell you he's not going to sign off on it. That's fair. I'm not going to argue.
Mm-hmm.
But if he argues with this, I'll just have to say, okay, this is where we disagree.
Mm-hmm.
This looks like really strong evidence for me, and I would be irresponsible if I didn't tell students that I think I personally would interpret it as evidence in favor of a young humanity.
Yep.
You got to know this, okay? You have to munch on why it has that pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so, notwithstanding all the battles between Nathaniel and Dr. Dan, here comes this other study. And just like, they even gave a figure, 5 to 10,000 years.
How about that?
And this isn't mitochondrial DNA or the Y chromosome. And so there you go. All right, we're getting down through the list. Dr. Robert Marks, distinguished professor at Baylor. Can you bring up his bio at
sure. Can you IM it to me in the chat, or
you have to Google
search it?
I don't. Yeah,
okay.
If you could Google Dr. Marks.
Marks. How's his last name spelled?
Marks.
Marks.
So I mentioned that Bill Dembski wanted me to be a graduate student at Baylor. Mm-hmm. It was in Dr. Marks's evolutionary informatics lab. Dr. Marks is friendly to ID. I don't know if he's a young Earth or old Earth creationist. He's good friends with Walter Bradley. He's a distinguished professor. He was singled out by Barbara Forrest, who wrote the book Creationism's Trojan Horse. She listed all these academics that they ought to keep an eye out for. And thankfully, there's so many now, it's going to be hard to keep track of them because they're coming out of the woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
And
I believe that's him. Is that correct?
Yes. And I asked him if he had any, you know what's going on in his labs, and that's him. Distinguished professor of electrical computer engineering. So he did work criticizing these computer simulations like Avita on how well it models evolution, because they're saying, oh, we can evolve irreducibly complex systems if we select for them in advance. Of course, we all laugh because it's like, well, how do you know to select these systems in advance? You're front loading the simulation. That's cheating. And I was going to work on that. I didn't. Yeah, we're done with this particular one. Okay. So I'll just take it down. I'll give you another one to search. How about M? So, 2 PhDs have been granted that are ID friendly: Winston Ewart and Eric Holloway. And unfortunately, that's drawn attention to his lab. And there's been another one whose name I'm going to withhold. He's a professor at a distinguished university. So Dr. Marks has been important in getting professors and PhDs for ID friendly. So that's all I'll say on that for now. Emily Reeves, Discovery Institute.
Okay. How did she spell her last name?
Reeves.
Reeves.
She's a PhD in biochemistry and biophysics. She runs a nutrition business. She's also a fellow at the Discovery Institute.
All right, I am trying to find her on the DI website. Give me a moment.
Emily Reeves.
I found pictures of her. Just trying to find her bio.
Oh, well, you could show a picture of her. We'll show a picture.
Well, I don't know for sure that it's her.
Well, I can tell if you post it. I could tell you because I know what she looks like.
Yeah, I don't see her on the DI website anywhere. So
it may be that they haven't put her as a staff member, but she may be a fellow.
Yeah. Yeah, it is possible that there's someone related to her on staff, maybe like her husband, for example.
Yes.
Okay, because he is on the Discovery Institute website.
Okay, his wife is Emily Reeves, and so maybe they just haven't updated it. So anyway, we'll just move on then.
Yep.
She's a young PhD biochemist, and she's part of the engineering group with Brian Miller. And again, this whole move with Randy Gulliuzza at the ICR and now at the Discovery Institute to define fitness in terms, to define adaptation in terms of engineering and machines. Because there's a whole channel devoted to debunking Sal because I like the machine metaphor. In all of us, there's a professor at my alma mater, Nicholson, who's saying biology shouldn't be using machine metaphors. And of course, when we hear that, it's like, well, that's telling us what we need to do. If we want to prosecute the ID case, we try to describe biology as machines. So it's great we're having a biochemist who's trying to describe also the architecture of biochemical systems. They're very good metaphors for machines that are better than anything we can build. So that's Emily Reeves, and she's part of the engineering group. And they invite contributors from the outside to make presentations, and I'm making one this coming week. I hope to make a public version of my presentation here on this channel. I already mentioned Jeff Tomkins. And then we have some interlocutors or visitors to the weblogs over the years. I want to thank them. One of them was named Tragic Mishap. That was his internet handle. And he introduced me. I was notorious. And then Matt, he's here. And I got to see him. As I said, I was visiting relatives. My brother-in-law is very sick. The prospect of death kind of puts everything in perspective. Why we do, what do we live for? What does this mean? If the universe is designed and it's for a purpose, and if we're part of that purpose, that's very ennobling. And then, that gives us thoughts about God, and it gives us thoughts about why the world's such a bad place. And the message of the gospel is God created and man fell and is in need of redemption and a savior. So that explains, so the Christian message is we are both the world is intelligently designed, but also cursed and in need of a savior. So right there is, if you ponder the gospel, you can see kind of the gospel message kind of written across all the creation, both in terms of the design and the curse and pain. And I, that's one reason I'm a Christian. So that's why I'm just mentioning relatives. I met relatives, and you put all this in perspective. I was at a McDonald's on the way there. I got lost. And, oh, thanks for the kind words, Matt. Yes, so we got to meet each other there in Dallas. This may be an annual event in Denton. So I don't know that I could make the drive every year or fly out. I love to fly, but the airlines are funny. So we'll just see. And especially now that there's the ICR there, I want to come out there. Oh, Dr. Rhodes, well, greetings. So, but it's again, as I said, death puts perspective on things. Mm-hmm. And God's very provident. And I got sort of lost trying to find a place to eat. And I just stumbled on a McDonald's. And there was an employee at the McDonald's there that was very sweet and kind. And I just interacted with her. And I was just so moved by her demeanor. I said, God bless you. I said, thank you for, she was saying, did you order a drink? I said, no, I'm fine. God bless you. And she said, oh, I need God's blessing. And I noticed she had a cross, big cross on her. She was wearing it around her neck. And she said, my mother's dying. I just about broke in tears because, I told her my mom passed away April 30th. I said, I totally understand. You don't need to explain. And I said, I'll be praying for you. She said, yes. She said she lives, her husband and son are up in Michigan, but she came down to Texas or Arkansas. I don't even remember exactly. I think we were at near the Texas border in Arkansas. And she's just working there because her mom's in hospice care. And she's just taking on this job at McDonald's. She said so many of her relatives died recently. And I was like, Lord, okay, this, we can talk about design and creation, but this is where it's really important. We need your love and care. And so we talked about some glorious things we discovered about the gospel being revealed in our biology, in evidence, kind of the scientific archaeology, evidence in favor of the Christian God. But, it kind of, the rubber hit the road. I said, all that now is meaningful because I can offer comfort to someone sincerely. That when I say I'm praying for her, I know that I'm not just saying it, I really mean it. And Angela, I know you're probably not listening, but my thoughts and prayers go out to you. And may it be that your mother's going home to be with her Lord and Savior. So that's it. That's the whole list. That was my trip. And we did it in less than 2.5 hours, covered 20 people or more. And we'll probably have more shows on some of the specific stuff that that each of these people, some of these people represent. I think we could do a great show or a research project just on Jeff Tomkins' discovery of the deleterious mutation. So tomorrow I'm doing a rebroadcaster of Ask Me Anything that we had with Dr. Dan. There'll be some shows on teaching young earth creation responsibly. And Dr. Rhodes said here, lost my uncle, mom's brother on Christmas Day a month ago, very difficult. Those issues make me realize how unimportant in the big picture secondary doctrinal issues really are. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And, this tells me how relevant what we do as researchers and students of science. We're trying to find evidence that God had promised in the book of Romans, that, and also in the Psalms, that the heavens declare his glory, and that we know about God's divine nature, his eternal power through the things that are made. So there'll be some more shows here. And Emery, if you had any closing thoughts, I might play.
No, I appreciate you letting me come and hang out. I didn't do a whole lot, but I appreciate you letting me come and hang out. Always a good time. I'm don't have a lot of graduate school this particular week. I'll see how it is in the coming weeks, but I appreciate you letting me come and hang out tonight.
Yeah. So with that, guys, I'm going to have the closing screen in honor of my dad. It is his birthday today. And God bless you all, and I look forward. Emery, I'll meet you backstage for just a few minutes after I play the closing credits.